Sometimes the quietest people leave the loudest marks on your heart. The cafe sat at the edge of the town, a small, weathered place that always smelled of coffee and sea salt. The kind of place people came to disappear for a while. That's why I liked it. The walls were faded, the windows fogged, and the sound of the ocean seeped in through the cracks like a low heartbeat. It felt honest, imperfect, but real. That's where I first saw her. She sat near the window, her back straight but relaxed, one hand resting around a warm cup of tea. Her hair, dark with a few strands of silver, framed a face that seemed both strong and soft at once. There was something deliberate about her stillness, like she was holding the world at a careful distance. I don't know why I noticed her. Maybe it was the way she looked outside and not at her phone. Maybe it was how she seemed to belong to the quiet. When she smiled, not at anyone in particular, just at a passing thought, something in me paused. It wasn't a flirtatious smile or one meant to be seen. It was faint, private, almost sacred, like a memory slipping through. I didn't say a word. I just watched, pretending to be lost in my notebook, but my focus betrayed me. The world outside blurred into the misty window, and all I could think about was how peaceful she looked, sitting there as if time had agreed to move slower for her. A few minutes later, the barista brought her another cup without her asking. That's when I realized she must come here often, enough for them to know what she needed before she spoke. There was comfort in that thought. Some people make small spaces feel infinite just by being part of them. She was one of those people. She glanced my way once, and I froze. Not out of embarrassment, but because her eyes didn't just look, they saw. There was no judgment, no curiosity, just a quiet knowing. And in that brief meeting of eyes, something unspoken passed between us. Recognition. Like two people standing on opposite sides of the same invisible loneliness. When she looked away, I felt the absence of her gaze like the sudden hush after music stops. It was ridiculous. I didn't even know her name, but I knew I'd remember the shape of her silence. Outside, the waves broke against the shore, steady and patient. Inside, she lifted her cup again, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. I found myself wondering what kind of life taught her to smile like that. Softly, as if she'd learned that joy is something you hold gently so it doesn't slip away. I didn't speak to her that day. I just sat there, memorizing the small details, the tilt of her wrist, the faint gold of her earrings, the way the light rested on her cheek. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the start of something that felt dangerously close. The next morning, the cafe felt different. Maybe it was just me. The rain had stopped, and the light that filtered through the window had a softer color, pale gold, the kind that makes everything look half-dreamed. I told myself I wasn't looking for her, but my eyes betrayed me the moment I walked in. She was there again. Same window seat. Same cup of tea, steam curling in small, ghostly shapes above it. She looked up as I entered, and this time, she didn't just glance, she noticed. A tiny lift at the corner of her lips, like she'd been expecting me without realizing it. I sat a few tables away, opened my notebook, and pretended to write. But my pen stayed still. The only words that came to me were hers, though she hadn't said any yet. When the barista asked if someone could share the extra sugar jar, she looked toward me. "Would you mind?" Her voice was calm, low, with that kind of warmth that doesn't ask. It invites. I smiled, shaking my head. "Not all." She reached over to take it, and in that tiny moment, fingers brushing, warmth meeting warmth, something quiet but undeniable passed between us. A pause. A heartbeat. "Thank you," she said. "Anytime." It wasn't much, but it carried the weight of something neither of us wanted to name too soon. We talked after that, gently like two people testing the temperature of the water before stepping in. About the rain, the sound of the sea at night, how small towns seem to hold memories longer than cities do. She told me she was just visiting for a while, that life had started to feel too loud elsewhere. I asked if the quiet was helping. She smiled, eyes turning toward the ocean through the glass. "Sometimes silence says more than noise ever could," she said. That line stayed with me. Her laughter came once, light, sudden, like something she hadn't planned. It was soft, almost uncertain, but it filled the room in a way that made the other sounds fade. And when she realized I was smiling at it, she looked down shyly, stirring her tea just to have something to do with her hands. I wanted to ask her name, but something told me not to rush. The space between us felt delicate, like touching glass that could fog with the wrong breath. So I let it be. When she stood to leave, the chair made a faint sound against the floor, the kind that marks the end of something that shouldn't feel so final. She turned, smiled again, and said, "You write, don't you?" I nodded, surprised she'd noticed. "Then write something worth remembering," she said softly. "You never know who might need to hear it." And with that, she left, her perfume lingering faintly in the air, a mix of jasmine and rain. For the rest of the day, my notebook finally filled with words. None of them were about her, but every line carried her voice. That evening, the air carried the scent of salt and wet stone. The tide had just pulled back, leaving the streets slick and shining under the amber streetlights. I hadn't planned to see her again so soon, but there she was, standing by the cafe's door with her umbrella closed, staring out toward the fading light. She looked peaceful, yet somewhere behind that calmness, I could sense a kind of hesitation, like she was waiting for something she didn't quite expect to happen. When our eyes met, her expression softened. "Seems the rain's finally given us a break," I said, stepping closer. "For now," she replied, her voice carrying that familiar gentleness, touched by the faintest trace of fatigue. I don't know who suggested the walk. Maybe it wasn't either of us. Maybe it was the silence that asked first. We walked side by side through the narrow coastal path. The sea murmured softly below the cliffs, waves rolling in and retreating with the same patient rhythm as her steps beside mine. Every few seconds, our shoulders almost brushed, close enough to feel each other's presence without touching. We didn't talk much. It wasn't awkward, it was honest. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled because it's already saying something. After a while, she stopped near a railing overlooking the ocean. The wind tugged gently at her hair, scattering a few loose strands across her face. Without thinking, I reached out and tucked one behind her ear. The gesture hung in the air between us, quiet and tender. My fingertips barely grazed her skin, but the warmth of it lingered far longer than it should have. She looked at me then, really looked, eyes deep and searching, as though she was trying to understand something about me, or about herself. "You shouldn't do that," she said softly. "Do what? Look at me like that." Her tone wasn't stern. It was trembling, careful, as if she wasn't scolding me, just reminding herself where the line was drawn. "I didn't mean to," I said, though we both knew I did. She smiled, the kind of smile that feels both like surrender and resistance at once. Then she turned back toward the ocean. "You're too young to understand what it means to need quiet," she murmured. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I've just been quiet for too long." That earned a small laugh from her, low and real. She looked at me again, softer this time. The wind caught her scarf and brushed it against my arm. I didn't move away. When we finally reached the corner where our paths split, neither of us wanted to break the silence first. She gave me a small nod, the kind that says thank you without words. As she walked away, I noticed her turn once, just before disappearing down the street. Her smile was faint, almost hidden, but it was enough to keep me awake that night, hearing the echo of waves and her voice saying, "You shouldn't look at me like that." And I knew then I would. Every time. The next few days passed in that strange rhythm only small towns know, slow, deliberate, filled with the sound of waves and the hum of distant rain. I saw her once or twice from afar, always near the cafe or the old bookshop across the street. We didn't speak, but there was something comforting in knowing she was still there, moving through the same world I was trying to make sense of. Then one evening, the sky broke open. Rain came down in sheets, the kind that makes the streets shimmer and the air smell like memory. I was on my way home when I saw her again, standing beneath the narrow awning of a closed flower shop, the hem of her coat damp, umbrella forgotten at her side. She looked up as I approached, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the street lamp. "Caught in it too?" she asked, half smiling. I nodded, stepping under the awning beside her. The space was small, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her shoulder. Water dripped rhythmically from the edge of the roof, tracing small rivulets onto the pavement. For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain did the talking, steady, relentless, honest. Then she sighed quietly. Do you ever feel like you've been running from yourself for so long? You forget what you were running for? Her voice was steady, but something in it cracked. I hesitated, not wanting to say the wrong thing. Sometimes, I said finally, but I think the running stops when you find someone who makes you want to stay still. She turned to look at me. Her eyes glistened, not from the rain, but from something far deeper. I used to believe that, she said, but staying still means facing what you've avoided. And I've avoided a lot. She looked away again, hugging her coat tighter around herself. The air between us felt charged, not with lightning, but with the weight of things unsaid. A raindrop slid down from her hair to her cheek. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, my thumb brushing away. The moment my skin touched hers, she froze, not in fear, but as if the world had gone completely still. Her breath caught. Then, softer than the rain itself, she whispered, "You shouldn't be this kind to me." "I'm not trying to be kind," I said. "I just don't like seeing you sad." She looked up at me then, eyes full of years she didn't talk about, stories she didn't know me. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The rain, the light, her scent, jasmine and rainwater, everything pressed in around us, holding time hostage. Then she smiled, a small, fragile smile that said thank you and goodbye, and something else I couldn't quite name. When the rain began to ease, she stepped out first, walking into the mist without looking back. I watched her go until she disappeared into the curve of the street. The sound of her voice lingered in the air, that confession of pain she hadn't meant to make. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just admiration anymore. It was care, deep, quiet, and terrifyingly real. The next morning, she wasn't at the cafe. At first, I told myself it didn't mean anything. People have lives, routines, reasons. But when the days began to fold into each other without her presence, the silence grew heavier. The seat by the window, the one where she always sat, looked strangely incomplete. Even the light through the glass seemed dimmer there, as if it remembered her too. I still came every day, ordered the same coffee, sat at the same table, pretended to write, but the words wouldn't come. They only existed when she was near, when her voice and the soft rhythm of her presence filled the empty spaces in my thoughts. The barista noticed, I think. "She hasn't been in for a while," she said once, trying to sound casual. I only nodded, pretending not to care. But I did, more than I should have. Some nights, I walked the same coastal path we used to take. The sea was louder now, or maybe it just echoed the noise inside me, that mix of regret and wondering. I kept thinking about the way she'd looked at me under the rain, the tremor in her voice when she said I shouldn't be kind. Maybe she was right to disappear. Maybe I had crossed some unspoken boundary without realizing it, made her feel seen when all she wanted was to stay hidden. Still, I missed her. I missed the small things, the faint sound of her cup against the saucer, the way she tilted her head when she listened, the half-smiles that said everything words couldn't. Each day, I hoped she'd walk back through that door, maybe by accident, maybe not. I rehearsed what I'd say if she did, something simple, something that didn't sound like confession. But the truth is, there wasn't anything I could say, because what grew between us wasn't built from words. It was made from pauses, from quiet understanding, from the way her eyes softened when mine found hers. And now those pauses were empty. I started writing again, but not stories, fragments. Descriptions of the sea, the smell of rain, the sound of someone laughing softly to themselves. Every word felt like a small way of keeping her alive in the spaces she used to fill. I didn't even know her name. That thought haunted me. How could someone whose name I didn't know occupy so much of me? One evening, I left the cafe early and wandered down to the shore. The sun was setting, the waves low and gentle. I thought about how love, if that's what this was, doesn't always begin with knowing. Sometimes it begins with not knowing, and the ache that follows when you realize you may never get the chance to. As the tide crept closer, I stood there and whispered to the wind, half hoping it would carry my voice to wherever she was. "I hope you found your quiet." But what I really meant was, I wish you'd found it here with me. I had almost stopped expecting her. Weeks had passed, and the routine had dulled into something mechanical. Coffee, notebook, silence. The chair by the window had become a ghost of what used to be. I sat facing away from it now, pretending not to care. Then one late afternoon, when the sky was pale and tired, I looked up, and there she was. She stood in the doorway of the cafe, hesitant, as if the place itself might remember how long she'd been gone. Her coat was the same soft gray, her hair pinned loosely, a few strands falling free around her face. But something in her eyes had changed, quieter, but also lighter, as if she'd made peace with something. The barista greeted her with a smile, and she ordered her tea like nothing had happened. But when her gaze found mine, the small, uncertain curve of her lips told me she'd noticed everything. My waiting, my silence, my surprise. "Ah," she said when she reached my table. Her voice was warm, careful. I managed, standing a little too quickly. "It's been a while." She nodded, setting her cup down. "I know. I needed time." The way she said it, soft, without apology, made it impossible to be angry. We sat there in the familiar hum of the cafe, the same place where everything had begun. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The sound of spoons, soft chatter, and waves outside filled the silence that had once kept us apart. Then she sighed, her eyes tracing the steam rising from her tea. "I thought leaving would make things easier," she said. "But it didn't. It just made everything quieter." I smiled faintly. "And quieter isn't always peace, is it?" She met my gaze, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. "No, sometimes it's just loneliness with better manners." Something about that line broke the wall between us. I laughed softly, and she did too, the kind of laugh that feels like a breath released after holding it too long. "I missed this," she said finally. "You mean the silence that talks too much?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, the company that doesn't need words." Her hand rested on the table, fingers close enough that I could feel their warmth. I didn't reach out right away. I just let the moment stretch, let it decide for itself. Then, slowly, I placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Her skin was cool, but her touch carried something steady, a quiet understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When she finally looked up, her eyes softened. "You stayed," she said, almost in disbelief. I didn't know how to leave. I answered. Outside, the light had shifted, the last rays of the sun painting gold along the window pane. Inside, the silence between us had changed too. It wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like belonging. She smiled again, the same small, gentle smile that started it all. Only this time, it felt like a promise. Evening arrived with the kind of calm that feels almost rehearsed, the world slowing just enough for two people to catch up to themselves. We left the cafe together that night. The air was cool, brushed with the faint scent of salt and rain, and the sky was painted in those soft shades of gold that only happen when the day surrenders without regret. She walked beside me, not too close, not too far, just enough that our hand would almost touch every few steps. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence had stopped being a wall between us. It had become a language of its own. When we reached the edge of the shore, the wind carried the sea's breath toward us, gentle and cold. The waves rolled in softly, erasing footprints almost as soon as they appeared. She paused there, looking out at the horizon, the fading light tracing the outline of her face. "I used to come here when I was younger," she said quietly, "whenever life felt too big to hold." Her voice was calm, but something about it made me stop and really listen. "Does it still feel that way now?" I asked. She thought for a moment, eyes fixed on the water. "Sometimes, but lately it feels smaller, quieter." She turned to face me then, her hair brushing across her face in the wind. I reached up instinctively, tucking a strand behind her ear, the way I had once before. This time, she didn't look away. For a moment, we just stood there, the ocean behind us, the world hushed around us. She smiled, softly, as if she was holding a secret she'd finally decided to share. "You have no idea how much you mean to me already," she said. Her voice trembled slightly at the end, Not from uncertainty, but from honesty. It wasn't dramatic or rehearsed. It was quiet, real, the kind of truth that doesn't need to echo to be heard. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Every word I thought of felt too small to match the moment. So instead, I stepped closer. Her hand found its way to my chest, light, hesitant, and rested there as if to steady herself. I could feel the faint rhythm of her heartbeat through her fingers, slow and certain. I covered her hand with mine. "Then maybe," I said softly, "I do." She smiled again, eyes glistening in the dim light. Not from sadness, but from something gentler like peace. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing. The waves kept whispering, the last light fading into dusk. And in that quiet, everything that needed to be said already existed. In her touch, in her breath, in the way the world seemed to exhale around us. When we finally turned to walk back, she slipped her arm through mine. No hesitation, no fear. Just warmth. Just calm. And in that simple gesture, I understood love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes as a quiet voice in the wind, saying, "You have no idea how much you mean to me already."